A genetically modified organism, or GMO, is a living organism whose genetic material has been altered by human intervention. In other words, living organisms are modified by introducing one or more foreign genes in order to create new characteristics such as resistance to cold or moisture, or to increase the shelf life of perishable food products. The species barrier is crossed when, for example, the gene of an Arctic fish is introduced into a strawberry in order to make the fruit more resistant to cold. Usually the manipulations are not so flamboyant, and most of the GMOs on the market today can be divided into two categories: those that are modified to be resistant to a specific herbicide, and those that are modified to produce their own pesticide. Biotechnology companies, the largest and most dominant one being Monsanto, create products which are designed to be used together, such as herbicides and the seeds that are genetically modified to resist them. At the moment, it's illegal to market genetically modified animals, but this may change with the pending approval for sale of genetically modified salmon. The way that foreign genes are inserted into host cells is a worrisome point. The cell membrane has to be damaged by the insertion of the gene, and there is little control over where the foreign gene attaches itself. Both how the host cell's own genes will react and express themselves after their environment has been modified, and how the inserted gene will express itself alongside these other genes have unpredictable outcomes. There is an element of Russian roulette in the creation of GMOs, despite the fact that biotech firms would have us believe otherwise. Biotech companies have sold us on the idea of more plentiful crops that use less water, less pesticide, less human labor, in theory, good things. However, these promises have fallen short and the benefits haven't been exactly what they were built up to be. On one hand, we're seeing a large corporate entity that has a philosophy that sees nothing wrong with modifying and merchandising life, seeking to control and profit from the sale of living organism. And on the other hand, we have a population that is being denied a real choice or awareness of what's even going on with their food. GMOs first appeared in our fields and quickly landed on our plate in 1996. GMOs were approved by Health Canada without sufficient independent studies being done. The studies used to prove their safety were provided by the biotechnology companies themselves. Products were brought to market with great speed, and even today, it's very difficult for independent labs to do studies on GMOs because biotech companies like Monsanto own the patents on the seeds, and they exercise their control to limit the use of patented seeds for study. Laboratory safety tests on animals, also performed by the biotech companies themselves, are normally only of 90 days duration. A recent independent study by Dr. Gilles-Éric Seralini studied rats who ate genetically modified corn, which Canadians also eat unknowingly, over a period of 2 years, a more significant period. Results showed that the rats had a mortality rate 2 to 3 times more than the control group. The gender of the rats also had a strong influence on the types of symptoms and diseases they suffered. In females, breast tumors and pituitary gland problems were the most frequent abnormalities. The pituitary gland plays a key role in sexual and reproductive function. In fact, 50 to 80% of the females fed with GMO corn showed symptoms of severe illness. In males, congestion and necrosis of the liver were the most predominant. The study found that in both sexes, marked and severe kidney problems can also be noted. Kidney problems, in fact, accounted for up to 76% of all the disease symptoms recorded. Health Canada and the biotech industry, represented in large part by Monsanto, who holds a virtual monopoly, based themselves on a principle of substantial equivalence in judging that a genetically modified food will not be fundamentally different than the same non-genetically modified food. Substantial equivalence embodies the concept that if a new food or food component is found to be equivalent in substance to an existing food or food component, it can be treated in the same manner with respect to its safety. They're not entirely wrong, but it's a very superficial and incomplete way of analyzing a food product. Technically, it is true that a GMO food at the nutritional level is a blend of protein, carbs, fat, vitamins, and minerals like any other food. But by limiting our analysis to this level, we ignore concern at a micro level at which nutrients are actually being absorbed and used by the body. Many concerns have been raised about the fact that GMOs code for new proteins that wouldn't naturally be found in our bodies. These foreign proteins then take on the role of coding for our hormones, which are then responsible for our metabolic functions. Are you starting to get a sense of how invasive these technologies can be for our bodies? We know, for example, that food allergies happen when our body has an exaggerated and unjustified reaction to a specific protein in a food. We also know that food allergies over the past few decades have become increasingly common. Consumption of GMO foods and their foreign proteins are suspected to increase sensitivity and allergic reactions. The bacteria gene in the Bt crops produces a pesticide which breaks down the gut wall of the insects that eat it, killing it rapidly. In India, cattle have been known to die from severe diarrhea after being allowed to graze in Bt crop fields after they have been harvested. This is not trivial. The Bt gene is suspected to continue to create this toxin in our intestines after we eat it, causing sensitivity and inflammatory reactions in our gastrointestinal systems. This could also contribute to making the inner walls of our intestines more impermeable and less able to absorb nutrients from food. Is it a coincidence that the incidence of gastrointestinal disease has also been increasing in humans over the last few decades? GM foods are also suspected to be major disruptors of the endocrine system, which regulates many of our body's functions: metabolism, growth and development, sleep and mood, just about everything, really. Given that the cultivation of GMO crops demands the application of specific pesticides, it's suspected to be harmful for all of those reasons. For example, Roundup, Monsanto's most popular herbicide, affects cell division, which is critical not only to reproductive processes, but also to the growth of cancerous cells in our bodies. Which brings us to glyphosate, the active ingredient in Roundup, and how it reacts in ways that weren't predicted with the other ingredients in its formulation. Glyphosate would keep us from absorbing nutrients by binding with them in our body. Its effect as a hormone disruptor are also known. This stuff is being massively sprayed on the plants that produce our food. Since the invention of Roundup, a series of cotton, corn, and soy seed called Roundup Ready have been genetically modified to be resistant to the effects of the herbicide, which non-selectively kills every other living plant except the modified ones. The popularity of Roundup is based on the fact that it is possible to clear an area of all living greenery using Roundup and then immediately plant the GMO seeds in that same area. In 2007, Monsanto was convicted of false advertising for labeling Roundup as an environmentally safe and biodegradable product. In addition, the manufacture of Roundup is harmful to the environment, requiring compounds derived from petroleum products. Its use is dangerous to the health of farmers and their families and carries increased risk of cancer, which could manifest as many as 30 or 40 years down the road. Alarming high concentrations have been found in soil and water in agricultural regions where it is used. Monsanto is also the company responsible for the manufacture of the highly toxic defoliant Agent Orange, vastly used during the Vietnam War, and of the common insecticide DDT, which is now vastly banned. Monsanto was a chemical company long before it relaunched itself as a biotechnology firm. There are other environmental risks associated with the current GMO monoculture, like the loss of biodiversity, which presents a very real risk to our food supply. Entire species could be wiped out by an epidemic if the individual plant species are genetically too closely related to rely on diversity to resist disease. Within a very genetically homogeneous crop, if one plant is sick, the rest of the plants will not have the genetic diversity necessary to fight the sickness. Being genetically all the same, they will all become diseased. And in the world where so many of the fields of a given crop are genetically related, you have to be worried about rapid spreading of disease. Fields may not move, but insects get around. There is also a significant risk of GMO pollution of neighboring non-GMO fields, as seeds blow in the wind and fall into other fields. We can expect Roundup-resistant weeds to develop, as well as superbug resistant to the Bt toxins. In fact, it's already happening. Soil depletion and saturation related to monoculture is measurable as we speak. The deaths of millions of bees is well documented, and their loss has an enormous environmental impact, as bees are needed to pollinate the crops. Scientists suspect that the GMO insecticides of the Bt family have a toxic effect on the brains of bees. All of these situations have been studied and documented, and I really invite you to look into them. I'm sure you will agree that all of this raises serious questions. not just for human health and the environment, but also for the ethical questions of having a seed monopoly like the one led by Monsanto. Monsanto owns the patent to 91% of the GMO seeds available in the world, and they do not allow farmers to replant the seeds from their own field. Instead, farmers must repurchase seeds year after year, causing a vicious circle of financial dependence and not allowing farmers to enjoy any kind of autonomy in their growing practices. This is a radical change in the way farming has been done since the beginning of time, you'll agree. GMO seeds are very tenacious, and it's not unusual for them to regrow the following year. This interferes with crop rotation in fields. Say, for example, when last year's GMO corn grows back on its own in this year's soy culture. Not only that, Monsanto can impose huge financial sanctions against farmers who fall victim to this kind of contamination. Even if the farmer is not responsible and the contamination of the crops is involuntary, Monsanto can and does sue them for reusing patented seeds which are considered to be Monsanto's intellectual property. Which raises another question on the subject of GMOs, as living things are being considered intellectual property. Do we have the right to allow a company to patent life itself? There is an obvious contradiction in the argument of the biotech firms like Monsanto, who say that their goal is to contribute to agricultural security and to stop famine in the world. In fact, over 80% of the genetically modified crops being grown are used to feed cattle, which end up on the plates and in the burgers of the people of the Western world. We are very far from feeding the poor and the less developed nations. Farmers were promised higher, sustainable yields, lower pesticide use, and more profitability. 15 years later, these promises have been found to be widely false. I invite you to research what happened with BT cotton farming in India to be convinced. At this point in time, Canada chooses to make no distinction between foods produced by conventional agriculture and those produced by transgenic agriculture. We feel this is a major mistake. We are asking that the precautionary principle be used. A recent Russian study is shedding more light on the impact of GMOs on fertility, with frightening results on hamsters rendered sterile by the third generation of GMO consumption. GMOs are already present in about 70% of prepared foods on our grocery shelves, especially in corn, soy, canola, sugar beets, and their byproducts. We think that people have a right to know what's in their food, and that we should be allowed to make an informed choice based on our values. This is why we are demanding mandatory labeling of GMO-containing foods. This is already being done in over 40 countries around the world. I often perceive a real cynicism when I talk to people about the importance of buying organic, as if they were unaware that the modern intensive agricultural model is just what its name implies, a modern invention. We have reached the limits of the green revolution of the late 60s. The ecosystems are now in a constant state of resilience. Pesticides, chemical fertilizers, preventive use of antibiotics for cattle, even the conditions in which the animals are kept, in cramped and stressful environments, without room to graze or move, especially for pregnant and nursing females. The entire model of agriculture is what the organic trend denounces. Organic agriculture is a response to all these deviant practices. It's a return to what we have lost or forgotten along the way, a return to a more humane model. Solutions exist, we have them, and they work. Take a look at the proposition for a new agricultural policy as proposed by Union Paysanne. Look into the non-GMO project. Figure out how to get into a network of farm baskets that are delivered to you weekly from local farmers. Find out where the community garden spaces are if you're in the city. In the meantime, as consumers, we have to protect ourselves by demanding mandatory labeling of GMO-containing foods. We have to insist that the government respect the policy of caution in introducing GMOs and new biotechnology inventions. We need to continue contributing to a shift in mentality on the part of both farmers and consumers. We have to mobilize and create the political will to make change, because politics is driven by us, the people. In fact, politics is us, lest we forget. Thank you for your attention.